The cabin was being devoured by flames. Antonio Vega held the two trembling children tight, his eyes fixed on the house where he had shared his last happy days with his late wife. In the glare of the fire, his wedding photo with Lucia was burning to ash, the glass frame shattering like the sound of a breaking heart. "You've got 10 seconds to get out, if you don't want to be burned alive," a cold voice announced over a loudspeaker, echoing from outside. Isabella, the 7-year-old girl, clutched Antonio's coat edge, her voice choking. "Uncle, where's my mom?" Beside her, Sophia, Antonio's biological daughter, bit her lip to hold back a sob, but tears still spilled down her cheeks. Camille Laurent, Miami's most powerful CEO, lay unconscious in a corner, blood flowing from a wound on her forehead. This woman, just 48 hours earlier, had been giving orders in the 41st floor boardroom of Laurent International Holdings. Now she was only a desperate mother, lying amid the ashes. Antonio looked down at his hands, hands that had once gripped an M4 on the battlefields of Afghanistan, hands that had saved dozens of comrades on the edge between life and death, and hands that, for the past 5 years, had held nothing but a mop. But tonight, everything had changed. Because 2 days before, a little girl had run to him in the hallway on the 40th floor, grabbed his shirt, and, in tears, said, "They're beating my mom. My mom is going to die." That night, at Laurent International Holdings, Brickell Avenue, Miami. Antonio Vega was mopping the hallway of the 40th floor. The clock read 11:47 p.m. The building was nearly empty, with only a few late workers and the night security team on duty. He was an employee. No, more precisely, the janitor. People called him the Ghost, because he always appeared after everyone had left, and disappeared before they returned. But what they didn't know was that Antonio Vega was not an ordinary man. He used to be Antonio Ghost Vega, an Army Ranger warrior, a combat medic who had served 47 special missions in the Middle East. All that remained of that past he had buried along with his deceased wife. That night, as Antonio pushed the cleaning cart down the hallway, a sound made him freeze. A heavy, sharp noise. Clear. By the instinct of a man who had lived among violence, Antonio stopped. His ears knew at once. This was not an accident. It was the sound of an attack. Then a painful moan, a woman's voice, followed by the sound of blows, then silence. He turned toward the heavy oak door of CEO Camille Laurent's office. The lights were still on. The door was closed. He knew he shouldn't interfere. This was the floor of the powerful, where rules were written with money. Antonio was only the janitor. He had learned to see no evil, hear no evil, speak no evil. But then, the door suddenly swung open. A little girl burst out, not running, but collapsing out of the doorway. She didn't scream. She didn't cry out. She only panted, eyes wide with terror, hair disheveled, and on her cheek the red imprint of a hand was still visible. Isabella Laurent, 7 years old, the only daughter of Miami's most powerful CEO. The girl saw Antonio, and in a desperate instant she lunged at him, grabbing his clothes, looking up with tear-filled eyes. "They're beating my mom. My mom is going to die." Inside the CEO's office, 4 men in black suits were surrounding Camille Laurent. Camille, a 38-year-old woman who had made all Miami respect her for her sharpness and confidence, was now slumped over the luxurious desk. Blood seeped from her forehead. Her lip was split. Her eyes were swollen. Her chest was bruised. They did not intend to kill her. They only wanted to break her. One of them held a thin steel wire, the kind used to strangle in professional hits. "Ms. Laurent, The largest man spoke in a deep, steady voice. Mr. Fontaine gave you 6 months, but you still refused. Now he's out of patience. Camille raised her head, her voice hoarse, yet still burning with anger. Richard Fontaine can burn down all of Miami, but he will never have my company. Then you'll have no company at all. The man sneered and signaled. And you'll have no daughter either. The door slammed open. Antonio walked in, not hurried, not speaking. He simply stepped inside, silent as a cold wind. The 4 men turned. Standing before them was a man in the gray uniform of a cleaning staff member. Short hair, hollowed cheekbones, eyes deep and still like a lake. The first man laughed. "Hey, buddy, you lost?" "This isn't—" Antonio's punch landed squarely on his face. No warning, no hesitation. The sound of bone breaking echoed through the room. From that moment, everything unfolded within 90 seconds. Now, back to the burning blaze. The 2 children were huddled together in a corner of the cabin, and the man, Antonio Vega, the janitor, stood before the final choice of his life. Step out and surrender, or fight to protect everything he had left. He looked down at Isabella and Sophia. Then he glanced at Camille, unconscious. A smile appeared on his lips, cold, sharp, and dangerous. "My girls," he whispered, "now I'm going to teach you a game. It's called How to Escape Hell." Back 48 hours to the battle at the CEO's office. The remaining 4 in the room had no time to react. The second man lunged, his right hand throwing a powerful punch. But Antonio didn't dodge. He met the punch, or rather, he caught the man's hand. A dry crack rang out. The wrist snapped. Antonio twisted, using that man's body as a shield, and shoved him hard into the glass wall. His face smashed into the glass. It shattered. Blood splattered everywhere. The third man pulled out a stun baton. He rushed in, aiming for Antonio's head. But Antonio had faced Taliban fighters with AK-47s. A thug with a baton didn't slow him by a beat. Antonio dropped low and stomped on the opponent's knee. The kneecap exploded. The man collapsed to his knees. Antonio snatched the baton, drove it into the man's side. Electricity surged through him, and he fell back, convulsing. The last 2 glanced at each other. They no longer saw Antonio as the janitor. The 4th, the biggest, likely the leader, drew a gun. But too slow. Way too slow. Antonio was already right in front of him. One hand locked the gun hand, twisting it back a full 180 degrees. The man's fingers shattered. The gun clattered to the floor. Antonio picked up the firearm, removed the magazine, tossed the rounds out the window, then smashed the barrel into the leader's temple. He collapsed. Not dead. Just unconscious. 90 seconds. 4 men. Antonio breathed steady, not out of breath. This was pure muscle memory, something he had repeated thousands of times on the battlefield. But when he turned back to Camille Laurent, what he saw was not a powerful CEO. He saw a woman trembling, eyes wide in shock, mouth open, unable to form words. "Who are you?" Camille whispered, her voice shaking. Antonio didn't answer. He stepped forward, knelt, and checked the wound on her forehead. Blood still flowed. A rib might be broken. Dilated pupils, a sign of a concussion. "I am Antonio Vega," he said in a low, steady voice. "Basement cleaning staff. But before that, I was a combat medic. And you need to be in a hospital right now." "No." Camille shook her head, trying to stand, but her legs trembled too much. "We can't call the police." "We can't call anyone." Antonio frowned. "You were attacked." These men will come back. Yes, they will come back. Camille stared straight into Antonio's eyes, voice filled with equal parts rage and despair. And if I call the police before they arrive, I will be dead. Because the people behind them control the police. Antonio was silent for a few seconds. Then he asked, "Richard Fontaine?" Camille flinched. "You know him?" "I don't know him, but I know the type of man he is." Antonio stood, looking around the room. The four men sprawled on the floor. "You have 10 minutes before building security will notice. And if you don't want the police involved, there is only one way." "What way?" Antonio looked Camille Laurent in the eye, Miami's most powerful woman, the one who had given orders to thousands, the one who never bowed to anyone. And he said, "Disappear." 10 minutes later, Antonio pushed the cleaning cart out of the service elevator, the staff freight elevator. Inside, under tarpaulin and trash bags, Camille Laurent lay curled, holding her daughter Isabella tight. No one looked at them. No one cared. Who pays attention to a janitor pushing a trash cart? But when they passed the basement security camera, Antonio knew. From now on, there was no turning back. He had just saved the life of a CEO. But he had also declared war on Miami's most dangerous man. And the worst part? He had just dragged his own daughter, Sophia, into this fight. On the screen of a man sitting in a dark office, the security camera feed appeared. Antonio pushing the cart, Camille Laurent, and Isabella disappearing into the shadows. The man smiled coldly. "Interesting, Antonio Vega." A deep voice echoed in the dark. "A ghost from the past. All right, let's see how long you can hide." Richard Fontaine, real estate billionaire, owner of half of Miami, had just found a new target, and he never let prey escape. Antonio's old Ford pickup rolled down a narrow street in Little Havana. This place was nothing like the glittering world of Brickell Avenue. They could have been two different planets. No skyscrapers, no fancy neon lights, just faded pastel houses, salsa music drifting from a corner bar, and the strong aroma of Cuban coffee spilling from all-night cafes. In the passenger seat, Camille Laurent sat in silence, holding Isabella, fast asleep, tightly in her arms. She stared out the window with a distant gaze, like someone who had wandered into another universe. She used to live in a penthouse on the 45th floor, overlooking Biscayne Bay. Now she was sitting in a diesel-scented pickup truck, driven by a janitor. Antonio stopped in front of an old 3-story apartment building. The yellow paint had peeled away, the metal staircase was rusted, and the hallway lights flickered weakly. "We're staying here?" Camille asked, her voice betraying disbelief. Antonio stepped out and opened her door. "This is the safest place in Miami for you right now." No one would think a $2 billion CEO is hiding in a slum. Camille bit her lip. She knew he was right. But her pride, the pride she had built over 20 years climbing to the top, was trembling. Antonio carried Isabella in his arms. The girl stayed sound asleep, her face resting against his shoulder. Camille followed him up the creaking iron stairs. 3rd floor. Apartment 7. Antonio unlocked the door, inside the apartment. The first sound Camille heard was laughter, a child's laughter. "Papa, you're home!" A 9-year-old girl, Sofia Vega, ran out from the living room, eyes bright. But when she saw a stranger, she froze, eyes wide. Behind Sofia, an elderly woman with silver hair, Rosa Alvarez, stood up from an old sofa. She had been watching a Spanish TV channel. When she saw Camille, she gasped. "Antonio, ¿qué pasó?" "What happened?" Rosa asked in Spanish. Antonio gently laid Isabella on the sofa, then turned to Rosa. Rosa, it's an emergency. She was attacked at her workplace. I need you to keep this secret. Rosa looked at Camille, the woman in a blood-stained Chanel suit, face swollen and bruised, then nodded. I understand, mijo. I won't tell anyone. Antonio took out his wallet and handed Rosa twice her usual pay. Thank you. I'll see you tomorrow. Rosa accepted the money, stroked Sophia's hair, and left. The door closed. Silence filled the small apartment. Sophia stood staring at Isabella, the strange girl sleeping on their couch, then looked at Camille, the stranger with the wound on her forehead. Papa, who is she? Sophia asked timidly. Antonio knelt, placing a hand on his daughter's shoulder. She's in danger, mija. And we're going to help her, okay? Sophia hesitated, then nodded. Okay. Good girl. Antonio stood and led Camille to the apartment's only bedroom. You can rest here. I'll sleep in the living room. Camille stepped inside. A single bed. A worn wooden cabinet. A framed photo on the table. A younger Antonio, holding a smiling woman with long, dark hair. Beside them was a little Sophia, laughing widely. Your wife? Camille asked softly. Antonio nodded. Lucia. She passed away 5 years ago. Cancer? No. Antonio was silent for a few seconds. She was an investigative journalist. Killed while tracking a human trafficking ring. Camille stood still, not knowing what to say. Antonio turned to leave. You should rest. I'll check your wound later. But before he reached the door, Camille spoke. Why did you save me? Antonio stopped. Didn't turn around. Because your daughter begged me to. And I can't watch a child lose her mother. He stepped out, closing the door behind him. Camille sat on the bed, trembling. She covered her face, tears streaming down. Not from pain, but from the first time in her life she felt completely powerless. The woman who once commanded a billion-dollar empire was now sitting in a small, dim room, relying on a janitor to survive. In the living room, Antonio was washing his hands in the sink, dried blood still clinging to his knuckles. Sophia stood in the doorway, watching. Papa? What happened? Antonio dried his hands and turned, smiling gently. Nothing, mi amor. Just work. But Papa isn't a doctor. Why is there blood? Antonio sat down and pulled his daughter into his arms. Remember when Papa told you about his time in the army? Yes. You saved lots of people. That's right. And tonight, I did it again. Sophia looked up at him, voice small. Weren't you scared? Antonio brushed her hair back. I'm always scared, sweetheart. But when someone needs help, I can't walk away. Sophia hugged him tightly. I love you, Papa. I love you too. Antonio kissed her forehead. Now go to bed. You have school tomorrow. Sophia nodded and ran to her room. Antonio sat alone in the dark. He looked at Lucia's photo on the wall. My love, he whispered. I've gotten myself into trouble again. There was no answer. Only the wind is blowing through the window. And then his phone buzzed. A message. From an unknown number. We know where she is. Don't think you've won. Antonio stared at the screen, jaw tightening. The war had just begun. 6:30 a.m. The smell of Cuban coffee woke Camille. She opened her eyes, her head pounding. Strange room, strange bed. Miami sunlight streamed through a torn curtain. For a second, she thought she was dreaming. Then it all came back. The wound on her forehead. The men. Antonio. She sat up, her body aching. Her ribs felt crushed. But she forced herself to stand, staggering toward the door. The sight in the living room made her stop. Antonio stood by the stove, pouring coffee. Sophia and Isabella sat at the small dining table, drawing. The two girls giggled as Sophia showed Isabella how to draw a dolphin. "You're drawing so pretty," Isabella said, her eyes bright, nothing like the terrified child from the night before. "So is yours." "Look at your turtle," Sophia replied. Antonio turned around, saw Camille. "You're up. Have a seat. Breakfast is ready." Camille walked slowly to the table and sat down. Antonio placed a cup of strong black coffee in front of her, along with a plate of buttered tostada and a bowl of fresh fruit. "I'm no chef," Antonio said softly, "but this is what I've got." Camille looked down at the simple meal, then up at Antonio. She couldn't remember the last time anyone had made her breakfast. In her mansion, there were chefs, servants, but no one ever looked at her as a person. "Thank you," she whispered. Antonio nodded, then gently examined the wound on her forehead. He opened a first aid kit and replaced the bandage with careful, practiced precision. The bleeding stopped. "But you've got a mild concussion. You'll need to rest for the next 48 hours. He paused, eyes steady on hers. "And now you need to tell me exactly what's going on." Camille glanced at the two girls. Antonio understood. "Sophia, can you take Isabella to the balcony?" "Yes, Papa." Sophia grabbed Isabella's hand and pulled her outside. When the balcony door closed, Camille sighed and began to speak. "Richard Fontaine is not a normal man." Camille gripped her coffee cup, her voice trembling. "He's a real estate billionaire, owns half of Miami Beach. But underneath it all, he's a crime lord. Money laundering, smuggling, political manipulation. He hides it behind the mask of a generous philanthropist." Antonio listened silently, his face unreadable. "6 months ago," Camille continued, "he offered to buy my company. $3 billion. I refused. Laurent International was my father's legacy. I'll never sell it." "And Fontaine doesn't take no for an answer," Antonio concluded. "Exactly. He started squeezing me. First, partners suddenly canceled contracts. Then the banks cut my credit lines. Then the media began spreading false rumors about me." Camille clenched her fists, her nails digging into her palms. "Last week, he sent people to see me. Said if I didn't sell, he'd take it another way." "Another way?" Camille met Antonio's eyes. "He wanted me to marry him. To make the merger legal. To turn me into his puppet." Antonio's eyes narrowed. "And when you refused?" "He sent those men. You saw it yourself." Camille let out a bitter laugh. "He wanted to break me. To make me beg him out of fear. But what he didn't expect." She looked at Antonio. "Was that someone like you still existed?" Antonio stayed quiet, thinking, then asked, "Do you have any proof of Fontaine's crimes?" "Yes, I have a hard drive containing all his illegal financial records. But it's locked in my office, safe. And now you can't go back." "Exactly. If I go back, I'm dead." Antonio tapped his fingers on the table, thinking, "Is there anyone you can trust?" "Someone outside the system?" Camille thought for a moment. "Yes, Senator Charles Hale. He was my father's advisor, the only man Fontaine couldn't buy. But I can't reach him. My phone was smashed last night, and if I use a landline, they'll trace it." Antonio went to a cabinet and pulled out an old phone. "Disposable. Can't be tracked. But you've got 30 seconds. After that, it has to go." Camille stared at the phone, then at him. You planned for this?" Antonio didn't answer, but his eyes did. He wasn't just a janitor. He was a soldier, and soldiers always prepare for the worst day. Camille took the phone and dialed. The line rang twice before a deep voice answered, "This is Senator Hale." "Senator, it's Camille Laurent." Camille? My God, I've been looking for you. Your company announced your sudden leave. I knew something was wrong. Senator, I need you to investigate Richard Fontaine. He tried to kill me, and I need you to do it quietly. I understand. Where are you? I can't say, but I'll call again in 48 hours. In the meantime, dig up everything you can on Fontaine. Financial records, illegal deals, all of it. Understood. Stay safe. Antonio raised his hand. Time's up. Camille hung up. Antonio immediately removed the battery, snapped the SIM card in half, threw both into the sink, and turned on the faucet. Done, he said. Now we've got 48 hours before… Ting. Antonio's phone buzzed. He looked down. A text from an unknown number. No words, just a photo. A photo of Sophia, on her way to school, and a line of text. Your daughter is adorable. Let's hope nothing happens to her. Antonio froze. The blood in his veins turned to ice. Camille saw his face. For the first time, she saw him afraid. They know about Sophia, Antonio whispered. And that was the moment everything changed. Antonio didn't say a word. He just stood there, staring at the photo of his daughter glowing on the phone screen. Sophia was walking to school, her pink backpack, her favorite white dress, her carefree smile. And behind her, blurry but unmistakable, a black car tailing her. Camille saw Antonio's hand tremble, not from fear, but from the fury rising in steady, unstoppable waves. Antonio, Camille whispered, get outside. His voice was ice cold. You and Isabella, go out to the balcony with Sophia. Right now, Camille didn't argue. She knew when not to approach a wounded predator. Quickly, she guided Isabella toward the balcony and shut the door behind her. Antonio stood alone in the living room. He closed his eyes, breathed deep, once, twice, 3 times. When he opened them again, the gentle janitor named Antonio Vega was gone. Standing there was Antonio Ghost Vega, the Army Ranger who had survived 47 deadly missions. He redialed the unknown number. The line rang once before someone picked up. A low voice, calm, smooth, with the rhythm of a smirk. Hello, Antonio. Marcus de Leon here, Mr. Fontaine's assistant. If you or any of your men lay a finger on my daughter, Antonio said, his tone steady but saturated with menace, I'll find you. And I'll bury you in the Everglades so deep no one will ever see your body again. A quiet chuckle came through the speaker. Oh, Antonio, you don't understand the situation. You interfered with our business. You took what belongs to Mr. Fontaine. Camille Laurent isn't property. Legally, sure. But under Miami law, Marcus paused, amusement in his tone. She's belonged to Mr. Fontaine for a long time. However, the man is merciful. He's willing to negotiate. What kind of negotiation? Simple. Return Camille Laurent. You get $2 million in cash. Your daughter stays safe. You go back to being a janitor. Everyone's happy. Antonio stayed silent. If you refuse, Marcus continued, his voice turning hard, we'll take both. Camille and your daughter. Understand? A beautiful CEO and a 9-year-old girl. The human trafficking market pays top dollar for merchandise like that. The blood in Antonio's veins boiled. You've got 2 hours to think, Marcus said. After that, we'll come collect. The line went dead. Antonio stood motionless, fists clenched so tightly his knuckles cracked. He turned toward the balcony. Sophia laughing with Isabella and Camille, sunlight catching her dark hair, her innocent smile. He remembered the day Lucia died, the helplessness when he couldn't save her. Her last words, "Don't worry. You'll protect our daughter. No matter what it takes." And now, some billionaire psychopath dared to threaten Sophia? Antonio opened the wardrobe. From the bottom drawer, beneath a pile of old clothes, he pulled out a locked metal case. He turned the key, flipped the latch. Inside, a Glock 19, 2 full magazines, a tactical knife, a military first aid kit, and a USB drive. The USB contained his old emergency contacts, remnants of his days in the service. Antonio lifted the pistol, checking every part. Perfect condition. He exhaled. 5 years. 5 years of burying his past. 5 years trying to live as a normal man. But now? Fine, he muttered. You want a war? I'll give you a war. Camille stepped in and froze. Antonio was gearing up. Fitted black jacket, Glock holstered at his waist, knife secured, movements crisp and deliberate. What are you doing? She asked, her voice trembling. I'm getting you and the girls somewhere safe. Then I'm going after Fontaine. Going after? Are you insane? He's got an army of bodyguards, cops on payroll. You're just one man. Antonio looked up, meeting her eyes. You think I'm just a janitor? You're wrong. He stepped closer, his voice low, calm, dangerous. I was special forces. I infiltrated Taliban compounds. I survived ambushes where no one else walked out. And most importantly, his eyes hardened. I watched my wife, Lucia, get murdered while investigating a human trafficking ring. And then I hunted down every man involved. I don't need the police. I don't need the law. Camille shuddered. You killed them? Antonio didn't answer, but the look in his eyes said enough. Now you have 2 choices, he said quietly. 1, trust me and follow my plan. 2, walk out that door and pray Fontaine lets you live. Camille swallowed hard. She looked at the man who had saved her, sheltered her, protected her child, and now was ready to risk everything to fight. I trust you, she said. Antonio nodded. Good. Then let's move. The pickup truck rolled into Wynwood, a district painted with blazing graffiti walls. But Antonio wasn't here for art. He stopped in front of an old garage, its steel door rusted. No sign outside. What is this place? Camille asked. The only place I hid something that can save us. Antonio punched in a code. The rolling door screeched open. Inside, an old Harley-Davidson with a sidecar, a worn leather jacket draped over it, helmets hanging on the wall, and a hunting rifle mounted above a tool rack. Camille looked around, then back at him. You've been ready for this all along, haven't you? You always knew the past would come back. Antonio pulled on the jacket, zipped it up. It's not the past that found me, he said, slipping on the helmet, tightening the strap. I never left it. He revved the engine. The roar filled the garage like a beast awakening. Get in, he said, turning to her. We're heading into the Everglades. The roar of Antonio's Harley ripped through the heavy Miami air. He gripped the handlebars tightly, while Camille sat behind him, her arms wrapped around his waist, a gesture that felt both strange and intimate, laced with unspoken fear. In the sidecar, Sophia and Isabella huddled beneath a blanket, holding each other, eyes wide as they watched the open sky unfold ahead. They left behind the skyscrapers, the neon lights, the world Camille once ruled. The deeper they drove along Tamiami Trail, the more the scenery changed. Concrete faded into endless wetlands. The city noise gave way to birdsong, to the soft drone of insects, and finally to the vast silence of nature, the Everglades, the great river of grass stretching beyond sight. Camille had never been here before. She had only heard of the Everglades through dry environmental reports during board meetings. But now, looking out at the sweeping green marshes, the tangled mangroves, and the boundless sky untouched by clouds, she suddenly felt small, not weak, but humbled, realizing for the first time that the world was far greater than the empire she once tried to control. Antonio turned onto a dirt path hidden beneath a canopy of trees. No road signs, no maps. Only someone who had lived here could find the way. At the end of the path stood a wooden cabin, weathered, its paint faded, vines crawling across the walls, yet still standing like a small fortress in the wild. He killed the engine. Silence swallowed them. Only the whisper of wind through leaves, the trickle of distant water, and the low growl of alligators somewhere in the swamp. "Welcome home," Antonio murmured. The cabin was Spartan to the bone. A stone fireplace, a small kitchen, a loft with 2 single beds. Framed photos lined the walls. Camille paused before one of them. A younger Antonio, out of uniform, smiling widely, his arm around a woman, Lucia. She was pregnant, belly round, standing beside him right in front of this very cabin. Sophia hadn't been born yet. "This was where we came whenever we wanted to escape the world," Antonio said quietly. Lucia loved it here. She said it was the only place she ever felt free. Camille swallowed hard. What was she like? Antonio took a few seconds before answering. She was an investigative journalist. Brave, stubborn, fearless. She was following a human trafficking ring from Cuba to Miami. She knew the risks, but still said, "If I don't do it, who will save those kids?" He stopped. One night, she didn't come home. I found her in an alley in Little Haiti. 2 bullets in her chest. His voice cracked. Sophia was 4. She didn't understand. She kept asking, "Where's Mommy, Papa? When's Mommy coming back?" Camille felt her chest tighten. "I promised Lucia," Antonio said, eyes distant, "that I'd protect Sophia no matter what. I wouldn't let her grow up in a world of violence. So I left the army, took a regular job, tried to live quietly." He turned to her, eyes burning. "But now, they threatened Sophia, and I can't lose again." Camille placed a hand on his shoulder, her voice steady. "You won't. We'll fight back." Antonio taught the 2 girls how to build a campfire. Sophia and Isabella sat side by side, stacking wood, striking matches carefully under his guidance. The 2 had become close, like sisters. Camille stood by the window, staring out at the vast swamp. She thought of her life. 38 years in the world of power. 15 years building a billion-dollar empire. And happiness? None. Family? None. Love? Also none. Her eyes fell on Antonio, kneeling by the fire, patiently showing Isabella how to blow gently so the flame wouldn't die. Sophia laughed, clapping when the fire sparked to life. And in that instant, Camille realized this was happiness, not money, not power, not skyscrapers bearing her name. But this, a moment by the fire, children's laughter, and the quiet strength of a man who had lost everything yet still found peace. "Mama!" Isabella ran over, eyes glowing. "Look! I made fire." Camille knelt and hugged her. "I'm so proud of you, sweetheart." "And guess what?" Sophia said. "We're going fishing tomorrow. I've never gone fishing before." Camille smiled through her tears. She realized how many moments like this she had missed in her daughter's childhood. "I'll come with you," she whispered. "Really? You promise?" "I promise." Isabella hugged her tight. Camille felt warmth spreading through her, the kind no amount of money could ever buy. Later that night, the 2 girls slept soundly in the loft. Antonio and Camille sat by the dying fire outside. Above them stretched an Everglades sky overflowing with stars. No city lights to drown them out. The Milky Way hung like a silver ribbon across the heavens. "It's beautiful," Camille whispered. "I've never seen a sky like this." Lucia used to say, Antonio smiled faintly, that when you look up at a sky full of stars, you realize just how small you are. And then things like money, power, fame, they stop meaning anything. Camille nodded softly. She was right. They sat in silence for a long while. Then Camille asked, "Antonio, when all this is over, what will you do?" He stared into the fading fire. "I'll keep living. For Sophia, for Lucia, and me?" Camille gave a sad smile. "Do I just go back to that cold, deceitful world where no one trusts anyone?" Antonio looked at her. "Or you change it." "Change it? You have power, Camille. But what are you going to do with it? To be richer? Or to protect people who can't protect themselves, like Lucia once did?" Camille fell silent. His words hit deep. For the first time, she wondered what she truly lived for, but peace didn't last. Far off, down the dirt road, a flicker of light flashed. Antonio shot to his feet. "Kill the fire! Now!" Camille quickly stomped out the flames. They backed into the cabin. Engines rumbled in the distance, several of them, growing louder. Antonio peered through the narrow window slit. 5 black SUVs rolled down the dirt road. "They found us," he said, voice low and cold. Camille's breath hitched. "How did they—" "Doesn't matter," Antonio cut her off, sliding a magazine into his pistol. "What matters is, you and the girls stay alive." He looked at her. "Trust me." One last time, the 5 black SUVs stopped about 50 meters from the cabin. Their headlights blazed through the swamp night, flooding the small wooden house in harsh white light like a stage spotlight. Antonio pulled the curtain shut and turned off every lamp. The only illumination left came from slivers of moonlight cutting through the cracks. "Camille, take the girls to the cellar," he ordered, his tone calm but unyielding. "The cellar?" "What cellar?" Antonio yanked the rug from the middle of the floor, revealing a wooden hatch hidden beneath. He pulled it open, exposing a small underground room with the scent of damp earth. "Lucia and I dug it when we bought the cabin. For hurricanes," he said, meeting Camille's eyes. "But tonight, it's going to save our lives." Camille rushed upstairs to the loft and shook the girls awake. "Isabella, Sophia, get up, sweethearts. You have to stay quiet and do exactly what I say." Sophia rubbed her eyes, looking at her father in fear. "Papa, what's happening?" Antonio knelt, pulling her into a tight embrace. "Mi amor, I need you to be brave now. Go down with Miss Camille and Isabella. No noise, no crying. Do you understand? What about you? I'll protect you." Just like I always have, Sophia clung to him, tears streaming down her cheeks. "I love you, Papa. I love you too. Always." He kissed her hair, then gently pushed her toward Camille. Camille lifted Isabella and took Sophia by the hand, leading them into the cellar. Before closing the hatch, she turned back to Antonio. "You have to survive," she said, her voice shaking. Antonio nodded once. "I promise." The hatch shut. He dragged the rug back over it, concealing the entrance, then rose and checked his weapon, loading a fresh magazine into the Glock. Outside. A voice echoed through a loudspeaker, calm and mocking. "Antonio Vega! This is Marcus de Leon. We know Miss Laurent is in there. Bring her out, and you'll get the money as promised. No one has to die tonight." Antonio didn't respond. He stood at the window, eyes sharp. 15 men. Black jackets. Armed. They spread out, forming a ring around the cabin. Complete encirclement. But they made one mistake. They came here expecting easy prey. They didn't know that Antonio Vega had fought in the Afghan mountains, where ambushes came from every ridge. He'd survived being surrounded before. He knew how to fight when outnumbered. And above all, they didn't know he was ready to die. Marcus's voice thundered again. "You've got 60 seconds, Vega. After that, we burn the cabin." There's no escape this time. Antonio peered through the crack in the curtain. They were prepping gasoline cans, the same tactic as before. But this time, he knew their game. He flipped a switch. The cabin's lights flared to life. The guards flinched. Why would he turn them on? Then Antonio stepped out the door. No gun in hand. Both arms raised. "I surrender," he called out. Marcus smirked. "Smart move, Vega. Where's Ms. Laurent?" "Inside," Antonio said evenly. "But I have one condition." "Condition?" Marcus scoffed. "You're in no position to negotiate." "My condition is—" Antonio's lips curled into a cold smile. "You've just made the biggest mistake of your lives." Marcus frowned. "What?" Antonio clapped his hands once. The cabin exploded. Not a fire, an eruption. Antonio had rigged a makeshift bomb using propane tanks from the kitchen, wired to the light switch. When he turned on the power, the timer started. And when they focused on him stepping outside, the cabin behind him became a roaring fireball. The blast hurled the 3 nearest men off their feet. Shrapnel tore through the air like gunfire. Flames towered 10 meters high. Antonio hit the ground, rolling behind a nearby SUV. He drew his Glock, already loaded, already steady. Chaos erupted. The mercenaries screamed, ducked, and scrambled for cover. But Antonio didn't give them the chance. 2 shots, 2 men down. He moved like a phantom, fitting for his old call sign, rolling through brush, sliding behind trees, firing in precise bursts. One guard aimed his rifle, but Antonio had already vanished into the darkness. The Everglades at night were his home turf. He knew every patch of grass, every hollow, every reflection of water. The city men did not. They were hunters turned prey. Another fell. "Find him!" Marcus shouted. "Shoot anything that moves!" Gunfire tore through the night, uselessly shredding leaves and bark. Antonio crouched behind a cypress trunk, breathing slowly. 10 men left. 9 bullets in his magazine. Not enough. But he didn't need to kill them all. He just needed to kill one. Through the gap in the reeds, he spotted Marcus standing beside an SUV, shouting orders into a radio. "Cut off the head. The snake dies." Antonio crawled through the tall grass, inch by inch. Silent. Invisible. A guard walked past him, barely 2 meters away. Antonio froze. The man never noticed. Closer. Closer, Antonio rose behind the SUV and pressed the gun barrel against Marcus's neck. "Don't move." Marcus froze. "Call your men," Antonio ordered. "Tell them to fall back." Marcus gave a short, bitter laugh. "You think I'm afraid to die? Fontaine will kill my family if I fail, then you'll die here instead. Your choice." Marcus turned his head slightly, then suddenly slammed his elbow back. Antonio fired. But Marcus had already yanked a grenade from his belt, the pin flying free. "If I die, you die too," he roared, clutching it to his chest. Antonio's eyes widened. 3 seconds. He kicked Marcus away and dove behind the SUV. Boom! The explosion shook the swamp. When the smoke cleared, Antonio lay face down, ears ringing, blood seeping from his shoulder. But he was alive. He turned. Marcus was not. His body lay crumpled, still, among the flames. The remaining men saw their leader's corpse, and panic spread fast. "Fall back! Fall back!" someone screamed. They piled into their vehicles and sped off into the night. Antonio lay there, breathing raggedly. He'd won. But at what cost? He looked toward the cabin, now a blazing ruin. "Camille," he whispered. "Sophia." He struggled to his feet, legs weak, blood dripping from his arm. Then the trap door shifted. It opened. Sophia was the first to climb out. "Papa!" Camille emerged next, carrying Isabella. Antonio dropped to his knees and pulled Sophia into his arms. "Are you okay, mi amor?" "I'm fine, Papa," Sophia sobbed. "I was so scared." Camille rushed to him, eyes wide at the blood soaking his shirt. "You're hurt." "It's nothing," Antonio said, forcing a grin. "Just a scratch." His legs buckled. Camille caught him. For the first time, she was the one holding him up. "We survived," she whispered. "We're alive." But Antonio knew. The battle was over. The war was not. Richard Fontaine was still out there, and he never stopped hunting. They didn't stop running until exhaustion caught up with them. It was 3 a.m. by the time the Harley staggered to a halt in front of an abandoned ranger station. Antonio nearly fell off the bike, his jacket soaked with blood from the wound in his shoulder. "Antonio!" Camille cried, rushing to catch him. Sophia and Isabella clung to each other, trembling with fear. Inside the station, Camille tore open the emergency first aid kit. Her hands shook as she saw the shard of metal buried deep in his flesh. I'm not a doctor." Her voice faltered. "You have to do it," Antonio gasped. "If you don't get it out, I'll get infected." Camille turned to the girls. "Sweethearts, go outside and try to catch some fireflies, okay?" When the door closed behind them, she picked up the forceps, her hands still trembling. Antonio locked eyes with her. "You ran a billion-dollar company. You've faced men far crueler than this. You're stronger than you think." Camille took a deep breath and inserted the forceps into the wound. Antonio groaned, but she didn't stop. She pulled the fragment out, disinfected, and stitched the cut. Her hands still shook, but her movements grew firm, steady. 20 minutes later, it was done. The wound was dressed. Camille slumped to the floor, hands smeared with blood, but in her eyes burned something new, something she hadn't felt in years, the conviction of someone who had just saved a life. Camille switched on the old radio. Static hissed, then a steady voice came through. "This is the emergency channel. Senator Hale. It's Camille Laurent." "Camille? My God. The news says you're missing." "That's a lie Fontaine spread," Camille said quickly. "Senator, I need you to call a press conference. Announce an official investigation into Richard Fontaine. Right now, I'll need proof, Camille." "I have it. There's a hard drive in the safe at my office. It contains every illegal transaction he's made." Antonio pushed himself up, still weak, but his eyes clear and determined. "I'll get it." "Are you insane?" "You're injured," Camille snapped. "I know the password to the safe. I know the security system, and no one ever suspects." "A janitor?" A grim smile flickered across his face. "This isn't just about you. It's about all of us. My wife, Lucia, died trying to expose men like Fontaine. If I don't finish this, her death means nothing." Camille froze, then straightened. "Then we do it together. This time, you're not going alone." Midnight in Miami. The Laurent Tower glowed like a beacon against the night. Senator Hale had called an emergency press conference. Dozens of reporters packed the lobby, cameras flashing non-stop. The news ticker scrolled across the screen. Senator Hale accuses billionaire Richard Fontaine of major criminal activity. At that same moment, Antonio and Camille slipped into the building through the service entrance, a path Antonio had taken countless times with his janitor's cart. "The guards will check IDs," Camille whispered. "Not if they think I still work here." Antonio wore his old gray uniform and cap, pushing the cart while Camille crouched inside it, just like the first night they met. They passed the guards without suspicion. Service elevator, 40th floor. The hallway was deserted. Everyone was downstairs, glued to the live broadcast. Antonio unlocked the door to the CEO's office, the room where everything began. The safe was still behind the painting. He entered the code. The door clicked open. Inside lay a small external drive. "Got it," Antonio said, lifting it from the safe. Then the lights flicked on. How touching. The voice was smooth, cold as steel. Richard Fontaine stepped out of the shadows. 6 armed men behind him. Fontaine, early 50s, slicked back silver hair, Armani suit, eyes as icy as the Atlantic. "My dear Camille," he drawled, "I knew you'd come back. Women like you never let go of power. No matter where you run," Camille stepped forward, chin high. "It's over, Richard. Senator Hale is announcing everything. The police are already on their way." Fontaine chuckled. "You think I'm afraid of the police? I own them." His gaze shifted to Antonio. "And you, the heroic janitor. Who do you think you are? A soldier? You're nothing but a cleaner." Antonio said nothing. He just stood there, calm, terrifyingly calm. "But you made the biggest mistake of your life," Fontaine sneered. "You touched what belongs to me." "Camille doesn't belong to anyone," Antonio said evenly. "And I'm not a janitor. I'm Antonio Ghost Vega." Former Army Ranger Fontaine narrowed his eyes. "Ghost? I've heard that name before." He paused, then laughed. "Ah, yes. You're the husband of that reporter whore, Lucia Morales. She died badly, didn't she? 2 shots to the chest?" Antonio's blood turned to fire. "You want to know who ordered her death?" Fontaine smirked. "It was me. She was digging into my trafficking roots, too curious for her own good. So I had her handled." Antonio stood frozen, except for his fists, clenched so tight his knuckles turned white. "And now," Fontaine said, drawing his gun, "I'll finish the job. This time, your daughter disappears too." But it wasn't Fontaine who fired. Glass shattered. Flashbangs exploded. FBI agents stormed through the windows. "FBI, drop your weapon!" Senator Hale stepped into the room, a cold smile on his face. "Richard Fontaine, you are under arrest for conspiracy to commit murder, human trafficking, and money laundering." Fontaine froze as the cuffs clicked around his wrists. The agents dragged him away. Antonio and Camille stood there, bloodied, bruised, breathing hard, and finally met each other's eyes. They'd won. At last, they had won. The Miami afternoon was heartbreakingly beautiful. Golden sunlight poured through the palms, the ocean breeze drifted in from Biscayne Bay, and children's laughter rippled across the park. Antonio sat on a bench, watching Sophia and Isabella chase each other through the fallen leaves. The 2 girls were no longer strangers. They were sisters now. "Wait for me, Sophia," Isabella giggled. "You've got to run faster." Sophia laughed, grabbing her hand so they could run together. Antonio smiled, but beneath the smile was a shadow of melancholy. His fingers turned the simple gold wedding band on his hand, the ring that once belonged to Lucia. "You still haven't taken it off?" Camille's voice came from behind. She sat beside him, holding 2 cups of Cuban coffee, offering one. I'm not ready," Antonio admitted. Camille nodded softly. They sat in silence for a while, watching the girls play. A month had passed since that fateful night. Richard Fontaine was in custody, facing 47 charges: human trafficking, money laundering, attempted murder. His empire had collapsed like a sand castle at high tide. Camille Laurent had returned to her company, but she was no longer the same woman. No more 16-hour workdays. She came home for dinner, tucked Isabella into bed, and read her stories until she fell asleep. As for Antonio, he turned down the offer to become head of security at Laurent Holdings. He only wanted peace for Sophia. Between them lingered something unspoken, something growing quietly day by day. "Antonio," Camille said softly, her voice unsteady, "there's something I need to tell you." He turned to her. "These past weeks, I've been thinking a lot about my life. How I've lived cold, alone, obsessed with power." She paused, swallowing hard. "But those days in the Everglades, they taught me what it means to truly live." "Camille, let me finish." She gave a faint smile. "I know you still love Lucia. I would never try to replace her. But I want you to know, I have feelings for you. Maybe it's love. Not because you saved me, but because you showed me the kind of person I could become." Antonio said nothing. His heart stumbled in his chest. "I don't expect an answer," Camille continued, standing. "I just needed you to know. Whatever you decide, I'll be here. As a friend, if nothing more." She turned to leave. "Camille, wait." She stopped. Antonio rose and walked toward her. "There's somewhere I want to take you." They drove out toward the cabin, now just a field of ash and charred timber. But Antonio didn't stop there. He led her up a small hill behind the ruins, where an old oak tree stood alone. Beneath it lay a simple headstone: Lucia Morales Vega, 1988 to 2020. Journalist, warrior, mother, the light of our lives. Antonio knelt, pressing his hand against the stone. "Mi amor," he whispered, voice trembling. "I'm sorry it took me so long." "Sorry I've lived trapped in the past." Camille stood back, silent, unwilling to intrude. "But I know you wouldn't want me like this," Antonio went on, tears streaking his face. "You always said, life's too short for sorrow, Antonio. Love. Live. Laugh." He slipped the wedding ring off his finger and laid it gently atop the stone. "You'll always be in my heart. Sophia will always know what kind of woman her mother was. But maybe it's time I let go." He pressed his lips to the grave. "I love you, Lucia. Always." When he stood again, his eyes were red, but lighter somehow, freer. "I don't know if I can love again," he said quietly, "but I want to try." With you, Camille burst into tears and embraced him. They held each other beneath the Everglades sunset, 2 broken souls learning how to heal together. 2 weeks later, at Bayfront Park, Antonio and Camille sat once more on the same bench, watching Sophia and Isabella toss a ball across the grass. "Daddy!" Sophia ran toward him, beaming. "Can I ask you something?" "Of course, sweetheart." She glanced at Isabella, then back at him. If Miss Camille and Isabella moved in with us, could I call Isabella my little sister?" Antonio froze. He turned to Camille. She was already looking at him, eyes glistening. "Mi hija," he said, kneeling and pulling her close. "Is that what you really want?" "Yes. I love Isabella. And I think Mommy would love Miss Camille, too." Sophia lowered her voice. "Mommy always wanted you to be happy." Antonio held her tighter, tears slipping down his face. Camille knelt beside them, taking Sophia's small hand. Sophia, you know what? I'd love that too, but I need to ask your dad first. Sophia looked up at Antonio, her eyes wide with hope. Antonio smiled, a warm, genuine smile. All right, we'll give it a try, Sophia squealed, running back to tell Isabella. The two girls jumped and hugged, laughing in the sunlight. Camille turned to him. Are you sure? I'm not sure about many things, Antonio said honestly, but I'm sure of this. Sophia deserves a family. Isabella deserves a family. And we deserve a chance. Camille smiled, placing her hand gently over his. In that case, she said with a playful glint, consider this a formal proposal. Antonio Vega, would you like to merge our families? Not for love at first sight, but for real love. The kind built on trust, sacrifice, and hope. Antonio laughed. That's the worst proposal I've ever heard. But what's your answer? He looked at the two girls laughing in the distance, then back at Camille, the woman who had changed his life. His eyes softened. I say yes. Saturday morning. Sunlight filtered gently through the tropical leaves outside, the soft Miami breeze carrying the scent of the sea. Birds sang. Children's laughter filled the yard. Antonio stood in the kitchen, pouring coffee. Through the window, he watched Sophia and Isabella playing fetch with their new golden retriever, Max. Catch, Sophia, Isabella shouted. Only if you run faster. Sophia laughed, dashing across the grass. Antonio smiled. A year ago, he could never have imagined this scene. They look so happy, don't they? Camille came down the stairs wearing simple pajamas, her hair loose and soft. Gone was the cold, distant CEO from a year ago. Antonio turned, handed her a cup. Sleep well. Better than I have in years. She kissed his cheek. Thank you for everything. They had been married 3 months earlier, a small ceremony in the Everglades, surrounded by only a few close friends. Senator Hale had officiated. Rosa Alvarez had cried through the vows. Sophia and Isabella were the flower girls, radiant with joy. Now they lived here, in a modest house, nothing like Camille's old penthouse, but warm enough for a family. Camille had changed completely. She still ran Laurent Holdings, but mostly from home, 3 days a week. By 5 p.m., she shut her laptop, cooked dinner with the girls, and read Isabella to sleep. And Antonio? He was no longer the gatekeeper. He'd opened a survival training center for veterans, a place where those returning from war could rebuild themselves, just as he once had. Mom! Dad! Sophia ran in, cheeks flushed from play. Can we go to the beach today? Of course, sweetheart. Camille smoothed Sophia's hair. But first, breakfast. Isabella toddled in behind her, hugging Antonio's leg. Uncle Antonio, I'm starving. Antonio lifted her into his arms, laughing. Then, how about my special pancakes? They sat together on a blanket spread across the white sand. Waves rolled softly against the shore. Sophia and Isabella built sandcastles, while Max chased his own shadow in circles. Antonio and Camille sat side by side, fingers intertwined, eyes on the horizon. Do you ever regret it? Camille asked quietly. Leaving your peaceful life to save me? Antonio turned to her, gaze steady. Not for a single second. But you lost the cabin, the place with Lucia's memories. He smiled faintly. No, I didn't lose anything. Lucia's still here. He placed a hand over his heart. And now I have something more. I have you, Isabella, Sophia. I have everything. Camille leaned her head against his shoulder, tears glistening. You know, she whispered, I used to think happiness was money, power, status. I was wrong. Then what is happiness? She looked toward the girls laughing by the waves, then back at him. Happiness is right now. Your hand in mine, their laughter. The peace of knowing that whatever comes tomorrow, we'll face it together. Antonio kissed her forehead. Then we found it. The sun dipped low, painting the Miami sky in amber and gold. Antonio stood by the water's edge, staring into the distance. In his hand was an old photograph, Lucia smiling, holding baby Sophia in her arms. Mi amor, he whispered. I kept my promise. Sophia's growing up happy. And me? I found my way back to the light. He kissed the photo and let the waves carry it away. A final goodbye. Camille walked up beside him, taking his hand. I don't mind, she said softly. Lucia would be proud of you. Antonio nodded. Tears fell, but they were no longer of grief, but of peace, release, and hope. Sophia and Isabella ran over, arms flung wide. Mom! Dad! Let's take a family picture. Sophia beamed. They stood together, Antonio's arm around Camille's waist, Sophia and Isabella giggling in front, Max sitting beside them, tongue out, tail wagging. Click. One photo. One family. One new beginning. Sometimes, life doesn't give us what we want. But if we're brave enough to fight, strong enough to sacrifice, and wise enough to let go, life will give us what we need. Not a perfect ending, but a new beginning. Antonio Vega, once a broken gatekeeper, had found himself again. Not in his past, but in the present, in his new family, in love reborn. This wasn't a story of a hero saving a damsel in distress. It was a story of two shattered souls who found each other in the dark, of letting go of yesterday to embrace tomorrow, of a love that doesn't replace, but continues, and above all, family isn't only about blood. It's about the ones who choose to stand beside you, no matter what. If you've watched this far, thank you, truly, for staying with the story until the very end. If it touched you, even just a little, please like the video so the algorithm knows you enjoy stories like this. Subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next episode. Comment on your favorite moment. I read every one and often reply. Share the video with someone who could use a little hope today. Every click, every comment, every share is a message. Keep telling stories that mean something. See you in the next episode.